This is what feels like it should be a simple topic. I'm me, you're you, but obviously once you get into the digital space, it gets very complex very quickly. So we'll start talking about some of the complexities that kind of arise when we talk about online identity. Will there ever be a state-issued ID? How many types of permissions do we need to really control our identity online? All those sorts of things, and we'll talk about it with my esteemed group of colleagues here, and considering this is an identity panel, I'll let them all introduce themselves.
Thanks, Robyn. My name's Andy Mitchell. I work at Facebook in strategic partner development. I work here in New York, working with media companies on how to best work on the Facebook platform.
And I'm Tim Dierks. I'm at the Huffington Post. I manage the engineering there, and very happy to sort of manage identity there. So.
And good morning. My name's Patrick Harding. I'm the CTO at Ping Identity. We're a company that helps our customers sort of solve some of their identity problems they have with their customers and partners. And that includes, obviously, integrating with things like Facebook.
Great. So, one of the questions that always comes to mind for me is, whenever I need to show my ID in the physical world, I throw out my driver's license. When I need to board a plane, luckily, still when I go to a bar, thanks to my mom for the jeans. But let me throw it to Patrick as one of working at a company that's kind of a front runner on identity management. Patrick, is there ever going to be a state-issued ID online?
So I wouldn't say it's going to be a state-issued ID.
Yep.
I don't think. Obviously, the fact that people are starting to use Google and Facebook and Twitter as sort of authentication sources online is great and isn't going to go away. But if you think about your driver's license, it is actually addressing some things that Google and Facebook aren't today. Something as simple as your age, verified age, or your street address, a verified street address. Actually, communicating that and online today isn't done. So there's actually opportunity there for us to basically provide verified age, which would be huge in terms of some of the online media. We hear all about it in the TV Everywhere initiative for online programming, as an example. Just solving that problem would be great. I don't think it's going to be a state-issued thing. I think that's going to come from the commercial sector, but it's one of the things we've got to look forward to.
So right now, when I log into sites, when I register at sites like Mashable, I'm using my Facebook account, my Google account. Is that what it's going to look like in the future, Andy?
Time will tell. Well, certainly, it's a lot of benefit for media sites to use your Facebook credential to log in because you know enough about people to give them a personalized experience by looking at their public profile. So, there's a lot of value, again, for media sites. So, we think that value is going to continue the momentum that we've seen with using Facebook credentials for logins and authentication.
Tim, you're a media guy, just like me. When you think about Huffington Post, I go to Huffington Post and I can connect my various social networking accounts, which kind of makes Huffington Post or Mashable or media sites kind of that level above, those security credentials. How does that work for you? What do you guys think about that? Where do you think it's going to be?
Well, yeah. So I think that obviously the registration and the association with the credentials is great for an authentication standpoint. People's being able to manage the passwords and everything else like that. You don't need that many accounts. But media now is not just sort of a one-to-many communication system anymore. It's also, peer-to-peer, a lot of social engagement. So it's really valuable to people to be engaged with that and integrated with those identities. And then I think that the interesting question over time is to what extent do these all get tied together. In the past, it was, you register an account here, register an account there. They may have different usernames. They may present in different ways, but they weren't directly tied. Now we have a circumstance where we have a much more tightly knit web of integration around single identity presences and, what connections does that create for people and their ability to manage their own reputations.
Mm-hmm. Andy, one of the perceived benefits of using your Facebook ID on media sites is obviously people, commenting space, people will, theoretically leave better comments. They won't kind of troll as much or leave like the aggressive comments and such. What do you think about real identity or authenticated identity? how does that play into media sites?
So, I mean, I'll be a little bit stronger than you are.
Yeah, sure.
It's, I mean, I don't think there's a perceived value. I think there's a real value there.
Yeah.
And it's, clear to me when I go to sites that use Facebook comments that there's just a better, more intelligent discourse there. And I've seen that across pretty much every site that's integrated comments. There's a little bit of a downside that if volume is important to you, you might lose a little bit of volume because the trolls and the flamers aren't going to be there. Because it's associated with who they are, and their friends get to see, if they are acting inappropriately in any way online. So, more and more sites are rolling out Facebook comments. Actually, Gannett just announced after a small test that they're going to roll out across all of their sites, both TV stations, local newspapers, and USA Today. So we're really excited about the momentum. And I think we announced 300,000 sites were using comments. So, we consider it a big success, and it's still a relatively new product.
Tim, I'm going to put you on the spot. Huffington Post using Facebook comments?
Well, I think that we, certainly not in the immediate future. I mean, I think it's amazing the amount of engagement that people have on Huffington Post. We've got a very robust and rich commenting system that we're very proud of. And but the number of comments that people leave on Facebook about our stories as well is huge. And so, I think that that's all really valuable. Love to look at ways to make use of all of that. I think we really like our comment system. We really think it's great.
Good.
There are places where Facebook comments make sense and it's a no-brainer, and there are places where it's a harder conversation about whether or not to implement them. So Talking Points Memo and Josh Marshall, who runs that site, we worked and spent a lot of time talking to him about their potential use of Facebook comments, and ultimately in the end, they decided not to go that direction for reasons that I understand, but just a thoughtful analysis, and he actually wrote a couple columns that are worth looking into about, all the upsides and what the potential downsides are for them. So again, I think it makes sense on the majority of sites, but things like politics, where you might not want your coworkers to see your particular political persuasion, or sites that deal with health that are very private. There are reasons that it doesn't make sense, but again, the value is that nice, thoughtful conversation that happens when you use your real identity and you're somewhat accountable for it.
So any app right now that connects with Facebook, connects with various identity providers, when the user connects, they get a screen that says, here's what this site would like to do. They'd like to post as you. They'd like to be able to, see your profile data. They'd like to be able to check in, offline, or when you're offline to see any updates, those sorts of things. Patrick, how do we, at the given state, I think there's some gaps in security, right? If I come to a media site and I connect with them, that media site has an enormous amount of power over my identity, or kind of the reflections or the badges of my identity, right? How do we address that in the future? What's the level of permissions and granularity and those sorts of things, so that we as users feel more comfortable connecting, and as we get, as you pointed out, the internet driver's license doesn't exist because there's nowhere where you can find, hopefully nowhere, where you can find my home address, my mobile phone number, and those sorts of things, unless we're connected. As those sorts of things do come online, and I'm sure they will, how do users protect that? And in a sense, how do media companies protect themselves from a backlash if that's not protected properly?
So I think everybody here would agree that most users are very unintelligent.
I am, at least.
They basically, they click through everything, no matter what's put in front of them, have done for years. Every single security technology we've put out there for consumers, they've basically ignored and just click straight through it effectively. So we can put up all sorts of great screens telling them what's going on. Most of them will ignore it and basically they just want to get to the point of getting it done and get to the service they're trying to get to. So given that you can't ignore it, I think we still have to do some of that. There is going to be some responsibility on the part of the identity providers, and actually that's where the government actually is starting to get a little involved, because generally speaking, when you need to start to protect people from themselves, you need some sort of policy or legislation to start to help police that sort of thing. There's an effort called the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, called NSTIC, that actually was proposed at the beginning of the year out of the White House, that actually is the government trying to do the right thing. They're basically saying, hey, we need to improve what's going on here. We need to help people address all the security problems they have, and it's not just about sharing information from my social media sites. It's all about the problems with phishing and identity theft and all those things that are actually going on, and start to put some requirements on identity providers to do a little bit more effectively, and to to authenticate a little better, to basically start to be much more careful about how much information they share, to be adhering to certain privacy policies, things like that. So.
I'm sorry, let me jump in. We see it a little bit differently because we see different authentication percentage based on what permissions are asked for. So I do think people are reading things a little bit more closely because they understand there are consequences to authorizing certain things. So like if, for instance, with a Facebook permission, if you ask for email address, you're going to get a lower authentication rate or offline. So there's certain permissions that we see that do have fewer people authenticate. So I just think people are paying maybe more attention than we're giving them credit for.
No, that's fair.
And don't be so surprised the government is doing the right thing.
Tim, we're going to ask you to wear two hats. You're obviously running engineering at Huffington Post. Before that, you were at Google for a pretty long stint.
Yeah.
You were the driving force behind Google Checkout, which I use. I was just telling you in the green room before, I use all the time. How did you think about identity there, and kind of as it relates to this? What's the right way to think about identity? What's the right kind of level of controls to give to users, and then how does that apply back to the folks that are actually going to use those credentials, like all of us in media in this room?
Yeah. So, Checkout doesn't have like a big peer-to-peer component. Like your identity on Checkout is not a big public presence sort of element. But we definitely had, there was an ongoing tension of the fact that you go out with merchants. You go to some, a large merchant who, has potentially the ability to check out themselves versus they want to do it, partner with Google. And then sort of who owns that connection, who owns that engagement, who owns that customer relationship is the way that a lot of people think of it. And a lot of that is about data sharing and can you trust people and other things along those lines. So, when we first started the product, one of the things we were really interested in was, particularly this is 7-8 years ago now, the the level of concern that people might have had with shopping on the internet, and I'm going to share my credit card number or my with somebody who I don't know how to trust, and so that by creating a boundary and allowing you to say, hey, I've got more control over this information, I can control what I share with a merchant, was a value. But we just found that there were a lot of mechanisms and a lot of merchants who really valued that engagement. They didn't necessarily want to use it for nefarious purposes, but there's a lot of different reasons that information is of use to people or is a commercial expectation. And so there's always a tension between the user, the person that they have the relationship with online, other parties that are involved in communication, as to exactly how much information can be shared and what it enables. So it's just really, it's an interesting thing to navigate, particularly in this kind of circumstance.
Patrick, ping identity is kind of one of, and I'm going to kind of describe it naively, mostly because I am naive, but ping identity plays a very large component in the plumbing of a lot of critical transactions that happen online, right? What do you see going on in that space that's going to come out, whether it's with Facebook identity, Google identity in the future? What in that space kind of plays into where the B2C identity management is going to go?
Sure. So I think it's a couple of things. As people recognize that website operators, website products, e-businesses are going to stop thinking about necessarily authenticating users themselves. We're going to be pushed into the future where we're going to have a fewer number of secure entry points essentially, to cloud services and online services, so that getting developers of these properties to think about not actually setting up a password store to authenticate a user when they build an application, that they are going to leverage a smaller set of identity providers that likely will include Facebook and Google, but I think will include others as well. That actually is going to change the way people think about how they authenticate online as consumers in the future. You add into the mix the use of mobile devices, iPhones, Androids, as alternative credentials, so that no longer do I think about having a password to connect online to describe who I am. I have some sort of much more secure mechanism coming out of my phone or something like that now starts to give me stronger authentication effectively. And we start to eliminate a lot of the issues we're seeing with phishing. We start to allow people to do more trustworthy things online. I mean, there's lots of opportunity there once we start to get to that model.
So tell me how that works. We've heard a lot about maybe the mobile phone is your new ID. You go to Starbucks. I was at Starbucks this morning right before here. A lot of people are using the Starbucks app to actually pay for their coffees in the morning. Tell us where a mobile device is going to go.
I think everybody here in the room has likely used at work one of those RSA secure ID tokens. One of those things you carry around and you have to type in that number every time, and they're a complete pain in the ass. I mean, everybody hates them. I mean, the security model to that is it's something you have and something you know. It's two things. It's two-factor authentication. The fact that smartphones are becoming ubiquitous, that everybody has one, now gives us an opportunity to replace that little token you had and use the phone instead. So essentially, you can start to store some secret credentials on your phone and use those that are much, much, much stronger than passwords as mechanisms to prove who you are. And that could be combined with some of the sort of biometric stuff that you could do, or some of the near-field communication stuff that you can do that Starbucks is doing. There's some other opportunities there.
Let me bring this back to interesting recent announcement. I'm sure that everybody in this room has heard about. At F8, Facebook announced a couple of things. Facebook announced timelines. Facebook announced a new way to share, where if a user goes to a media site and gives the media site the ability to write to that person's timeline, then they can do certain things like push to Facebook whatever articles I'm reading on that media site, or a variety of other kinds of actions that can be recorded on Facebook. I'd love to throw it to Andy to find out a little more about that. If you can give us some clarity about how that's working, how you think about how folks in this room, when they think about that kind of sharing and that level of sharing, how should we think about it? How should we approach it? And then I also want to throw it, and I might actually throw it first, and I'm sorry, Andy, I might throw it first to Tim, because I know you're new at Huffington Post, but I remember the first, at least this is just me, the first time that I saw this sort of sharing was actually at Huffington Post. I think it was called Huffington Post Social.
Yes.
And that would track what I was reading and tell folks. How much? What has Huffington Post learned about this? What can we all learn from that experience when we think about what Facebook is doing now?
Yeah.
And how much is too much?
I think that. So I think there's a couple of things. I think that one thing is that there's so many things that are entangled in this subject. There's I think you were talking about authorization and authentication. There's some vague idea of identity, whatever that really means. But, personally, and there's privacy. And again, what does that really mean? For me, speaking personally, privacy is an interesting thing because it's hard to know exactly, I'm not that concerned about having information. I mean, obviously, I store my life online. I share a lot of information with a lot of stuff. Google has all of my email for years. I don't find that deeply concerning because I feel like I understand, okay, great, they've got that, but it's not like, there's folks there trawling through it at night, laughing at, whatever, my drunken emails. So trust me, they're not.
Don't give us too much credit. Zach.
Well, I can speak for a fact that I know that they're not. That its reputation management is one of these elements, and I think that that's one of the things where when we talk about this sharing, and passively, and a little bit more of people being able to observe what other people do online, I think it's enormously powerful because it's very engaging and it's a great ability to be more connected with what your friends are doing, get them connected with what you're doing, and share that facet of your experience. And I think that's a powerful communication. I think that one of the things is that the large world can be so impersonal, and it's big, and we don't sometimes spend as much time in person as we do, as we perhaps did in some rose-colored glasses world of the past. I think that one of the opportunities is to recreate the social engagement mechanisms that might be relevant in a smaller town, in a neighborhood. If I'm in a neighborhood and I go out and get a cup of coffee, I'm going to see my friends. That's a public event. Somebody might see me. They may not even speak to me, but they might see me ducking in to the diner on the street or something along those lines. And so, there's a certain exposure. You live your life in public, and it's alienating in a certain way, I think, that if we live our lives too much in private. And so affording people the opportunity to be more engaged with their community is like, this is what's going on, is valuable. But people definitely need to have control. They need to have awareness. They need to have comfort that they know what's being shared and how. And people don't always want to do everything out in public. So I think it's really important that we create mechanisms where we're sensitive to the sorts of things that people want to share and what they don't want to share, that we give them the ability to have control over that and perhaps even edit after the fact. If they've made a little mistake, we can try and get them to take that back a little bit. And have really clear controls and awareness. And I think that's more than just placing an obscure checkbox on some hidden settings screen, but making sure that people are really comfortable. And I think that what we've found is that the more comfort people have and awareness, the more they will be able and willing to engage with this. We were talking before about how if you ask for more privileges in an app, you tend to have a lower level of people are less likely to grant those rights. But I think the other thing we found is that if you can do a better job of explaining to people like why certain things are important, why they're valuable, or how they add value to them, then that can get them over their hump, right? Mm-hmm. So if you need to ask me for my birth date on some website, well, that's a little foreign. But if you tell me that this is to support some particular feature or something along those lines, then maybe that makes me more comfortable with it.
So I used to work in the magazine business before I came to Mashable. And in the magazine business, when you think about identity, I think there's an interesting aspect to it that magazines become almost a badge of identity. Whatever magazine I leave out on my desk for coworkers to see, I'm leaving it out there, usually intentionally, so it says something about me. If I leave out, all the different magazines are here, but if I leave out Scientific American, I'm trying to tell Pete Cashmore, if he drops by, that I'm a smart guy, I'm into science, all those sorts of things. I want that to be sort of my badge of identity, describe me. There are other magazines that I may read in my personal time that I don't want to leave out on my desk and have all the coworkers see. I think I probably shouldn't name those here, but they're not that bad, though. Don't worry. Magazines as badges of identity, if it gets into the digital world, is what I'm reading a badge of my identity, Andy? If I'm reading, a highfalutin story on Huffington Post, and then, I'll throw my brand into it. I go to Mashable and I read, float through a gallery that's just for fun at lunchtime. Does that describe me to all my friends on Facebook? How do we think about that?
Well, totally, and that's what Timeline will do, is capture. I'm going to allow you to curate the identity that you show to your social network and to your friends. So what we are trying to do is create, let anyone create whatever level of comfort that they have sharing. We just launched a new subscribe feature where people can open up their profiles on Facebook to the public and have people subscribe to their public updates, and then controlled granularity all the way down to sending updates to specific groups. So with what Timeline allows you to do is authorize certain sites that have implemented the Open Graph to share your activity. And so that is ultimately up to the site on how they allow and how they facilitate that sharing. It could be, passively, it could be more actively. And then on the back end, you can completely curate your timeline. So if you read a story that at the time you thought was okay to share, and then for whatever reason, later on you're not comfortable, is you can go back and edit your timeline and just take that completely off of it. So what we work very hard to do and have made great strides in and will continue to refine is allowing people to have complete control over the identity that they show to their social network and within their social graph.
Tim, is that how we think about it? So I mean, how do we control what comes across that I'm reading? I mean, how do I come to Huffington Post and feel very comfortable that what I'm reading, that I want people to know, they can know, but other things I can either, do I just have the ability, do media sites just give us the ability to quickly remove things? Or how do we think about that?
Well, we absolutely. I think
or do we go stealth mode?
Well, right now that's exactly what we call it.
Yeah.
I think we agree. It's evolving, right? I think that people's engagement with the internet, certainly, when Facebook launched, even what we had, 5 years ago or whatever, is that. There's been levels of people's progressive comfort with sharing online that have advanced. And so, we sort of have to track what people are comfortable with and how perception moves forward. This is clearly really engaging. People get comfortable with it. They get to understand it. They say, hey, look, I could see that under some circumstances there will be stuff to be afraid of, but that in reality and execution and with the controls that I've got and with the engagement I have, particularly with the sort of larger media brands or, the big brands that I engage with either online or wherever, that I have a certain comfort, that I might be scared at some site, but I'm confident the Huffington Post is going to take care of me. And so, we have to track that. We can look towards whether we say, here's a category of stories that you may not consider so aspirational, and so we maybe give you a slightly different control. We've seen implementations where they give you the ability to ask before sharing each time. We might choose to do that some of the time. I think there's a lot of tweaks, and I think it'll be progressing. The right feature for this year is not the right feature for next year, is not the right controls for the year after that. The audience is going to come to learn about it.
Well, and site to site too. I think it's Scientific America. You might be willing, and they might be more likely to have you share all your activity. And a site like the Huffington Post that has a wide range of content, there may be places where you're not comfortable sharing all your activity.
I don't have any idea what you're talking. What would you not be?
I have some screenshots. I'll share.
But that gets down to signaling. It gets down to communicating to the user what actually is going on. Because I could easily have forgotten what I actually signed up to tell Huffington Post that I would actually allow because I did it 3 months ago.
Well, I think that's the trap, isn't it? That you could forget that you sat it on to share until one of your friends says, well, I can't believe you're looking at this NFL cheerleader gallery.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's also, it happens in other situations too. I mean, I show up at some random websites, and because that website's Facebook enabled through Connect, it already knows who I am. That's sort of a little freaky when that pops up, and they recognize myself already. I sort of forgot that I might have been already logged into Facebook, and this is sort of happening. But, that's okay. I'm getting used to it. Google's doing the same thing, a slightly different way, but with their advertising today, with what they're tracking about me, that I presume, this is where I'm losing some of my anonymity online. I'll be, reading an article on Boston.com about how the Red Sox melted down in September and see an advertisement for the latest OAuth security protocol. I mean, completely unrelated, but I know I'm interested in OAuth. How the hell did they tie those two things together? So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on back there.
I think the thing that's worth mentioning is, just to answer your question more completely, is that what the value is to the media sites. And so what we found in the early days of the Open Graph, when we launched on a very limited number of sites, but the metrics, so that what that sharing does, it is just broadcasts your activity to your friends, and your friends see what you're reading. And what's really interesting is when you see a handful of your friends are reading a particular story, and that's a very high signal that you're going to be interested in that story as well. And what we've seen is delivering significant value to our media partners. Mog announced, I read in All Things D the other day, one of the music sites, that their traffic from Facebook is up 4x since implementing the Open Graph. The Guardian in the UK has announced 1 million app installs after their Open Graph implementation through their Facebook, through their on their Facebook Canvas page. So we're seeing it's delivering real value to media partners, and we think that just that cutting through the noise and giving you good signal on what's going to be important to you is important for our media partners and valuable as well.
It's great, and I think one thing that everybody mentioned here is really think about how you're going to use identity if you are the product person, the GM, the what have you, who thinks about how your media brand is represented online. Really think through how identity matters to you and how you want to Andy's point, utilize identity to bring more traffic to your sites, to make you a little more out there in a way that gives the right signals for your brand. And unfortunately, we just ran out of time, so I want to thank my panelists.
Thank you.
Patrick,
Thank you very much.
Tim, and Andy.